Hello, thanks for joining me again for the second part of my paper. So, this paper I delivered at a conference and it was directed towards psychotherapists, in particular Gestalt psychotherapists. And my motivation was to help therapists really think about their approach to working, um, in particular with women coming out later in life, but more broadly, to look at our unconscious bias and prejudice and assumptions and how we can work with ourselves to be better therapists. So that was the angle it was written in. So since then, I've been recording shorter, I say shorter, they're not that short, but some chunks of the paper. And the main audience for this is an informal audience of friends, colleagues, clients, interested people who want to know more about this stuff. So a lot of the people listening to this video will be later in life lesbians or psychotherapists working with that demographic. So last time I was speaking about my theory about why relationships in particular bring out more prejudice and more bias in us, perhaps, than some of the topics. And if you listen to that, you'll see that I was saying it's a very intense process, and it's our fear and our need for certainty that gets us into this idea that we can know in advance what a good relationship is and what a bad relationship is, and certainty, and that the extreme version of that is prejudice, rigidity, rules, inability to see other people's versions of the best relationship that they can have for their personality, for their partners or plural partners' personalities, and in the circumstances that they're within. So this all arose from my research into women at midlife and those coming out as lesbian, and why they were going to support groups, which is what I was doing, rather than therapy. And this process for me happened at the same time as perimenopause and menopause. And I'm completely engaged in researching this. So thank you for joining me, listening, and I really hope that you'll comment as well, because this is something I want to talk about. So I'm hearing my side of the conversation. I would love to hear your side of the conversation. So this wish to explore this topic came from my own personal and professional experiences in recent years. And the paper has a classic Gestalt agenda, which is to become more aware. It's not to try and change bias. We have bias, but it's to make it conscious, so that we can see our bias, see our prejudice, and name it. And my invitation to anybody listening is to reflect together on our own bias, and to begin to encapsulate our approach to diversity in our own words. You'll notice that there'll be some Spanish in these slides because the conference was in Madrid, and that was part of the request in presenting our papers. If you look at the picture, Gestalt has a theory called field and ground, which or figure and ground. So what's figure is what we see, and what is field is the whole picture, and it depends on our focus how we see the picture. So this picture, I don't know how you're seeing this. I tend to see it as a young woman with a slender neck, wearing some sort of fur collar, looking away from us, but I can also see it as an old woman with a large nose and chin, and a headscarf. So the image itself says a lot to me about how we see women, and how much can change just from what we focus on or what is figure for us. So to introduce myself, I'm a psychotherapist with 34 years experience. I'm a woman who married a man, and I raised a family and had a private psychotherapy practice. It was very successful. And then at the age of 50, I came out as lesbian. And now I'm happily married to a woman who is part of my adult children's family. And I broke my own assumptions about myself, and I broke other people's assumptions too. And the paper's very much about challenging our judgments of what a healthy relationship is and noticing our own contradictions. So where could I find the therapy I needed to process the consequences of such a huge life change? And I remember scrolling through lists of therapists trying to work out whether they might be an ally to LGBT people from their profile photograph. You know, could you tell from their shirt or their haircut whether they believed in conversion therapy or were supportive? And a point that I think is important to make to therapists who are allies is they need to put that in their information, so that people like us can feel safe when we go into therapy. So within a short amount of time, I found that my new community, the rainbow community, wasn't assumption free either. So we'll be looking at that today. And repeatedly, the answers to research questions about therapy just showed very little understanding of lesbians, of coming out, or of coming out later. And the lack of awareness wasn't always limited to straight therapists. So I'm wondering, is psychotherapy influencing our culture to self-diagnose and label others, or is popular psychology culture perhaps influencing therapists to judge relationships more than our philosophical stance would have? Because we're not trained to judge and analyze. We are trained to, it was particularly humanistic or Gestalt therapists, we're trained to observe the world from the client's perspective and feed that back to them. So I have a lot of perspectives to bring, but 4 perspectives I have to bring to this topic is that I've been a straight therapist and a gay therapist, and I've been a straight client and a gay client, and I've got a lot of material to think about therapy with. So the question, why many women in need of support prefer informal online support groups to psychotherapy, and a condensed version of my findings is written up in Queering Gestalt Therapy, which was published by Routledge in 2023. There's a picture of the cover, and this paper is a continuation of the theme of what was published in the book. But I want to extend my exploration to the training of therapists and the extensive bias within the very foundations of psychoanalysis, psychotherapy, and therefore popular psychology, which I see all feeding into each other. You know, the precepts of a humanistic therapy like Gestalt should mean it's ideally placed to be a radical countercultural space, but we're part of a deeply oppressive field. This bigger picture is deeply oppressive, and it doesn't magically disappear inside the training room. or the therapy room or within ourselves. And one of the quotes that I quite like to use was written above Carl Jung's door and translated from the Latin. It says, "Called or not called, God will be present." And to me, this is not so much about God, it's about the wholeness, or the wholeness of the person. Everything's in that room, because my client is in the therapy room and I'm in the therapy room. And so everything we've absorbed comes in with us. And so our sexuality is in the room, and our bias and our prejudice is there, and we can't leave it outside. So what can we do about that? We can't keep those things out. What we can do is become conscious of and acknowledge all the subtle behind the scenes stuff going on with the self. So this work around our own prejudice and bias never ends, and it's important that it's constantly challenged. So let's take a brief look at the certainty of popular psychology. And I'm using the word certainty because this relates back to another part of the paper, which is in the first bite-size chunk that I recorded, which relates to this idea that because we're anxious about attachment, we like certainty in relationships. And if we can be certain that, you know, we can have the relationships that we want, and we can have love and attachment, it you know, temporarily soothes our anxiety. But of course, nothing is certain, and I go into more detail on the other recording about that. So when we're frightened, we need certainty. So I just went through Amazon looking for books on relationships. So here we've got How Not to Die Alone. I mean, you can't get a better description of the fear, and no doubt the sales were very much affected by such a scary title. I can't see it so well. 8 dates to bring your relationship happy, does it say? Something, and lasting. And Mars and Venus together forever. You know, forever is another one of these certainty words. So, you know, and getting past your breakup, women who love too much. There's all these answers in these books. And some of what I'm working with for myself, of course, and with my clients is that there isn't certainty, and there aren't answers. And part of the maturing and the growing and the strengthening is to really begin to trust ourselves that we can cope with uncertainty. And that's a far more achievable goal, to begin to trust ourselves, than achieving certainty, because there is no certainty. Okay, so by and large, my first assumption that common relationship rules tend to serve old, now dead white men is correct. And this certainty creates a market for anyone acting as a relationship guru who can make money from a client's need for certainty and rules. And, you know, and my stance is not popular for me to say, well, there is no certainty, and, you know, I can't make your relationship last forever. It's not a great selling point. It's so much better to sell the solution of how not to die alone. So most of us have a selection of self-help books that help inform our practice as therapists, as well as our personal lives. And increasingly, more and more clients are learning theory and strategies from TikTok and Instagram. They can learn 5 rules for one issue and a breathing technique for the next issue arising. And I'm not putting that down at all. I think it's, you know, I think sharing information is great, and much of this information is useful. But as therapists, as Gestalt therapists, we're not reliant on techniques. We don't like techniques for technique's sake or techniques per se, and we don't like theories because it can just become new rules for the client to swallow from the so-called expert. And what I, what my passion is for my clients, for all of us, is to trust ourselves. And if that isn't what coming out's about, what is? We don't want to be out of the frying pan into the fire, swapping one set of rules about how to be as a straight woman for another set of rules about how to do gay properly. Yay, it's not about being straight or gay. It's about being comfortable in yourself and trusting yourself. And for me, certainly, it's about my relationship with myself. So we don't want new introjects. Introjects is the Gestalt word for rules, things that we swallow whole. We don't want new introjects for our clients to swallow. In Gestalt therapy and person-centered and humanistic therapies, we support clients to explore, to create, to destroy, and to play. So it's a different way of thinking that's quite unusual in a world that likes to go to the doctor for the medication. That isn't the sort of therapy that I practice. So hormones. So I don't have an answer, by the way. Why do so many women come out in midlife? I think that women come out later generally because of the social conditioning, and this is what a lot of my paper's about, and that invisibility to ourselves. And having spoken with other people who work in this area, like Anne-Marie Zanzal, she says that some people are just what she call it, gay in glass closets. It's like they're so gay, it's obvious. And others are more femme or more straight passing. And in the support groups for later in life women that she works with, there are a lot more of the femme straight passing. And I think that because of stereotypes, again, it's more the visible person that looks like a lesbian, whatever a lesbian looks like. I mean, a lesbian looks like this. But what those people who fit the stereotype maybe have to come out earlier because they're seen, they're visible. And I recently learned that women who have existing dopamine management issues, that's a complex way of saying ADHD, those types of neurodiversity, they might have increasing difficulty in managing their dopamine levels as their estrogen drops. Now, you see, I see this as a judgment of women's behavior to even call it dopamine management issues. Do the women themselves have issues, or does the society have issues with the exuberance and flourishing of the said woman? Just a question. So I wrote in the Routledge book, no one is suggesting that estrogen makes women straight, but a majority of menopausal women concur that they have decreased capacity to accept other people's standards or ideas about how they should live their lives. It is possible that a drop in estrogen is a contributory factor for some women to be less conforming and more self-directing. So that's a formal, more academic or literary way of saying that a middle-aged woman ain't gonna put up with your shit. So we'll move on. One of the, I found so many exciting and interesting papers and studies and literature, but I spoke for a bit with a woman called Michaela Johnson, who wrote a paper called From Dead to Femme, a qualitative analysis of lesbian representation on television. And I hope one day that I'll be able to interview her and put her on my upcoming podcast. This quote really struck home for me. Messaging about a marginalised group can impact how someone in that group sees themselves. And that is core to this coming out process and the need for therapy. The thesis that she wrote was so riveting and well written. I struggled to cut it down for the presentation and to just pull a few things, but this is what I pulled out as a complete novice to lesbianism. On television, and especially in porn, lesbians are portrayed and created for the male gaze. They fit society's ideal: active, slim, tall, long hair, beautiful. Sometimes a lesbian kiss or lesbian sex is portrayed in a way that is purely aimed at male sexual fantasy and doesn't even look like lesbian sex to me. For example, heterosexual sex seems to have a clear start and end, and on TV at least ends with both partners flopping back onto the bed post-orgasm some minutes after having torn each other's clothes off. And my experience of lesbian sex is that it can last a couple of days, incorporates decent snacks, some naps, baths, cooking, and it doesn't end because one or both of the partners have orgasmed just the once. And then there are these other portrayals of lesbians, the dyke with shaved hair and piercings and tattoos. And often in the dramas on TV, this character dies or is a humorous supporting character. And they don't hang around with other dykes, but they prop up straight people in their more important lives. And until someone like me, who fits neither of those stereotypes, joins a group like mine, we don't often see ourselves reflected anywhere. So I really loved Sarah Lancashire's portrayal of a head teacher coming out later in life in the TV show Last Tango in Halifax. But let's just have a bit more of a look at Michaela Johnson's work. So she says that although lesbian characters have been present since the early history of television, they have often been portrayed in a negative light. Initially, these characters were limited to villain roles where they preyed on young straight women until they died violently. Lesbian characters were expendable and easily written off, making them easy characters to hate. And that she also notes that in more recent years, a growing number of shows have contained lesbian representation, and by the numbers, things look to be improving. But are they? Let's have a look. So what she says, while this increase in representation is no trivial feat, the messaging surrounding these characters also needs to be addressed. Studies have shown that messaging about a marginalised group can impact how someone in that group sees themselves. And negative messaging can impact the self-esteem of an individual and shift how they view themselves. So while the quantity of lesbian characters have grown over the years, that does not mean that the ways these characters are portrayed has improved since the early days of television, and many stereotypes and tropes still exist today. And that just felt so true for me. And so you can find her paper. I also spoke to her on LinkedIn. And if you like what she's done, let her know. I think it's so important, and this needs to be published. This needs to be out there. So I just thought I'll come back to why I love Sarah Lancashire. So because she was a lesbian I could relate to. She wasn't a porn star, or bordering on porn star, sort of that sort of lesbian. And she didn't adhere to the stereotypical lesbian dress code and haircut. And I've said already, my behavioral choices at this time in my life are simply a deeper and broader authenticity than I'd experienced or been able to express before. And perhaps naively, I was delighted I could create my role in a relationship with a woman without having any prototypes or expectations to adhere to. And I thought my partner and I could start with a blank slate. Well, you live and learn, don't you? I mean, it is much more of a blank slate than other relationships I've had before. So Nina Sosanya, who plays Kate in the drama, says that the relationship between the couple was one of the most normalized lesbian relationships shown on the small screen. And Sarah Lancashire said that she got letters from women saying that Caroline's same-sex relationship personally inspired them. And she said that when asked how did she act this, she said that she focused on the humanity of Caroline more than the sexuality. And that's nice. Hey, we're human beings. Good. This quote from me, this voice bubble bit here, "We are made so invisible we can't even see ourselves," came up in my writing and in my work. And this is the emotional punch, really, for this is the impact. And I still can't say that or read that without feeling something very strong, and it's a mixture of horror and grief, I think. And this is why seeing ourselves represented is so important. How can we begin to see ourselves more? It helps. The representation helps. The space helps. The encouragement to think that noticing who you are and listening to your inner voice is important. That all helps. So, there's the representation in the media, there's therapy, there's meditation, there's journaling, there's these support groups. All of these things help make us not just visible to other people, but visible to ourselves. And this touches on a very raw place for me. And my research led me to conclude that some lesbians are so marginalised and misrepresented or underrepresented that that we lose sight of ourselves. And again, some people say, oh, it's obviously a lot easier to come out now, and maybe that's why you came out late. And to me, 2024 has nothing to do with a woman's process of coming out. It's what she was raised in. And some of my writing sort of talks about, it's being raised in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. But I was just interviewing somebody the other day, and she was half my age, but she had absorbed, you know, a lot of anxiety around her sexuality, and coming out was, you know, it is a big deal. It's still a big deal. So, you know, looking at an individual's culture, environment, and what they're absorbing is important. And we, all of us, are growing up in a sexist and homophobic environment to some extent. When we are represented, we're often curated for the male gaze. And again, like I say, even when women are going into therapy, there seems to be very little understanding of lesbians coming out and coming out later. So lesbophobia, it's seen as typical that lesbian relationships are fast, intense, and deep, and result in the lesbian U-Haul. That refers to women moving in together very quickly or moving across country to be with each other. And it's a joke about lesbians that I believe is derogatory. It appears to indicate a lack of self-control or a lack of an ability to make rational decisions. And many avoid the U-Haul simply because of its perception. There are reasons. In, you know, every case needs to be taken on its own merit, but there are reasons to be wary of a U-Haul. But you know, it's not. It's very contaminated by this lesbophobia. And then there's lesbian bed death, which refers to the dying off of the original frequent and amazing sex, which happens at the beginning of relationships. And both these terms, and there's more, but both those terms arise from a type of sneering about the depth of attachment that's possible between two women. So I hate them. I hate both those terms. I also dislike the fact that the words limerence and codependency are often used by therapists and their newly lesbian clients. Depending on the length of the relationship, they might use limerence for a new relationship or codependency for a longer term one. And I haven't got the time today to go into that, but it's about pathologizing just the diversity of relationships, and some people do move fast and do feel intensely and do feel deeply. Women do naturally in their bodies have more oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. Oxytocin helps facilitate the merger between a mother and a baby, and helps with the falling in love process. And the falling in love process is extremely important in all romantic sexual relationships, because it's that bonding that gives strength for the testing that's coming down the road. And limerence and falling in love have exactly the same symptoms. They have different behavior. Limerence is a disorder of inappropriate obsessive rumination in a relationship where the feelings are not reciprocated. So there's something about making women mad and crazy and hysterical that just smacks of the old, the old sexism. And, lesbian love isn't a joke. And the U-Haul and the bed death aren't particularly lesbian. It happens all the time in straight relationships. It's common. So this is my my request, for us to be very cautious about labeling other people's relationships and processes, because psychology and popular psychology, I would be suspicious of as being rooted in sexism. So the later in life lesbians often been confused by a lack of representation or misrepresentation of lesbians, as I've said. Then she meets popular psychology, which is based on male and heterosexual norms. So the importance of an informed therapist is twofold. And then a second caution for therapists is that I believe that coming out is a trauma. And because the lack of representation results in confusion about sexuality. One of the research questions I asked was about the participants, whether they have known or seen lesbians when growing up in the 1950s or 1960s, and the responses were all similar. No, they didn't have any experience, or they had limited experience, which just wasn't relatable to the participant themselves. So this lack of information wasn't just limited to straight therapists either. And I've now turned this into one of the exercises in my workbook, which I have called cameo appearances of lesbians, and you do it on your life timeline. So there's a timeline drawn out, and the point of the exercise is actually very, very few of us have much to put on that timeline. Right, so are lesbian relationships just some poor imitation of heterosexual relationships? What do you think? And then going from, what do you think, going into what do you feel? Because the conditioning is that, you're just a lesbian because you've not found the right man, or you're just passing time with women until you find a man to settle down with. So just, watch for your unconscious bias. Being a lesbian doesn't mean that there isn't that somewhere in a small dark corner of your psyche. Be aware of your ableist and lack of awareness regarding disability and sickness in relationships, and your ageism, because relationships in the first half of life can look different to relationships in the second half of life, and so on. Yes, I wanted to, again, we're getting towards about 40 minutes on this recording, I think. So there was a study done around delegitimization and women's perceived emotionality. And the hypothesis is that calling a person emotional is more delegitimizing than identifying that person's argument as wrong. Again, that sort of realization is like, yeah, I know that, right to the core of me. And women are more delegitimized than men when this occurs. So yeah, I'll let you read that slide in your own time, but I think that's an important part of what I'm putting forward today. Also want to mention the doubling effect. Again, I'm not sure that I agree with this particularly, because it does rely on gender stereotypes, but the doubling effect refers to the fact that in same-sex relationships, certain features of feminine or masculine relationship styles can be doubled. but summarized, it might mean that gay women might be prone to merging and talking and crying and loving and adopting several pets, and gay men might have some communication problems, sex outside the relationship, and be more dependent of each other. So you can see there's some massive generalizations here, and we're sort of on dodgy ground, really, because these are assumptions. On the other hand, I have noticed that women seem to be more prone to deep and intense attachments in same-sex relationships. And we have that, as we said, that there's generally more oxytocin within a woman's system. So we're more likely to get some of the features of what's called codependency. But this is where a great deal of misunderstanding comes in terms of therapeutic support of these women, because my question is what if we don't pathologize the intensity of the relationship but accept it? If we when we're calling it codependency or too intense, what sort of a norm are we comparing it with? Who's it too intense for? If the couple are fine with it, why is it too intense? It's really, about working with the couple about what they find problematic, rather than deciding, because you've grown up with these norms about how a relationship should be. When we're applying those norms, we're applying sexism and we're applying homophobia. Relationships between two women are different, and I stand by that. And I think, what if we don't pathologize? What if we accept and understand? So has my slide moved on? No. It has now. Okay, just check I haven't missed one. Yeah, I have missed one. Okay, so a complaint about therapy for women who've had their heart broken by a woman is that the therapist doesn't understand how different this is to straight heartbreak, and straight norms about independence and codependence don't always translate for lesbian relationships. And I think as well, those of us who've come out later in life, we're prone to apply our straight norms to the lesbian relationships because that's what we know. But if two consenting adult women engage in a depth of connection that's previously been impossible for them in their relationships with men, isn't it somewhat discriminatory to throw up our hands in horror because it doesn't reflect the standard accepted individualized norms of heterosexual relationships? I think working with a huge number of women coming out later in life, that some of these women carry some shame about the experience of the lovely confluence and merger. Confluence is a Gestalt word. Every process has a purpose. Merger, as I've said, is very, very important in the bonding for romantic relationships, sexual relationships, for mother and baby, and so on. This I am you and you are me merger process is it's intoxicating, it's wonderful, it's lovely, enjoy it, don't miss it, doesn't last that long. They often present, these women, they often present in therapy believing there's something wrong with them because of the impact of the breakup, or because they were so intensely involved, and there's nothing wrong with them. It's just that particular combination of those two people, that's how it was experienced and felt. And if that's how it was experienced and felt, then of course it's devastating to end. So straight therapists or therapists trained by straight therapists in straight psychotherapy in a society that's sexist and patriarchal, they might just miss their prejudice here and believe the client's perspective that their attachment style or personality is disordered. I have had several clients come to me and tell me that, you know, that their attachment is disordered, and, you know, and they, you know, they have certain personality disorders and all sorts. And I don't, you know, it turns out that is not the case at all. So we're beginning to learn that codependence is defined differently in different cultures. And Western society just loves independence and individuality. And some Eastern cultures are more community based. There are some cultures that don't really have a word for I or self. So in recent years, I've come out not just as lesbian, but I've also come out as disabled following severe illness. And so there are multiple layers of codependence in my own relationship based on the necessity of the physical care and emotional care. We care for each other. We both have vulnerable parts, and we both do anticipate that the other person will find something difficult, and sometimes preempt that, or help steer things so that the other person doesn't get upset. That could be called codependency. But it's very functional for us in our relationship to do that. We're both skilled at doing that. We've both had a lifetime experience of doing that. So for me, it's not so much about doing that. It's about the consciousness of that, the discussion, the communication, the acknowledgement that that is what's happening. You know, so what we can do in therapy with the lesbian couple is we can explore the processes of assuming clairvoyance in the relationship, and we can explore the impact of confluence and merger, and we can have some fun with it. But please, therapists, please respect the dignity of these women. They're not hysterical, they're not disordered, they don't need to be put into institutions or asylums. It's phenomenally powerful to fall in love with a woman for the first time if you didn't realize that you were gay, and you know, and then you're suddenly with the right gender. And I am sure some of the discrimination against women in same-sex relationships is based on jealousy and fear. So without being grandiose, the conclusion I came to is that one has to be emotionally mature to have a successful lesbian relationship. And to be quite honest, when I was younger, I wasn't mature enough to handle it. So as a therapist, I began to create lesbian-friendly therapy to take a person's context into account. And you can see some of my adverts on YouTube. I won't show this now, but I can put a link in the notes. Okay, so what about the clients that therapists might have who've come out younger? Those clients, you know, I invite you to explore the high alert that they'll be on, and, you know, that they will have experienced either directly or just in the soup of living, death threats, daily microaggressions. I think it's sensible to assume trauma with any marginalised group, even if that's not how the individual names it or constructs it. It's to understand that some of the processes, physiological, psychosomatic, and so on, will be within that person. We know that marginalised groups do have more health problems and higher stress levels, and so on. Rainbow flags have not defeated homophobia any more than Black Lives Matters has defeated racism. And the importance of community in the healing journey can't be underestimated. So if you're a therapist and you're not part of the rainbow community, obviously your compassion and your education about working with this demographic are essential, but there's still not enough. Do help them to find at least one person who gets it, so that they can continue to have good therapy with you, but they will need to find community as part of their healing journey. So my early introjects around my own sexuality, being born in the 60s, came from the values of people born in the 30s, my parents, whose own parents were born at the turn of the century. And as I was looking in Cosmopolitan magazine in the hairdressers, it's just clear that very little has changed. The imperative on these titles are, that as a woman, it's my job to have great sex and to understand the psychology of men who are seemingly not tasked with understanding the psychology of women. One of the downsides of the 50s and 60s and the emergence of popular psychology and texts by Dr. Spock for children, or the classic for a married couple, The Joy of Sex, the historical sociological impact of that is that women then had to expand their capacity, not just to keep their husbands and children well fed. The woman's now being tasked with being their therapist, of understanding child behavior and her husband's emotional and sexual needs. So the birth of popular psychology became another chain with which women were bound up, taking responsibility for other people beyond beyond that they need to. So the message on the magazines I just picked out for this paper are: women need to study and learn how to catch and keep a man through sex. So read this article, do your homework, catch a man and have sex, otherwise he'll go away. Sex is based around men's need. Here, a woman needs to know a man's favorite kinky moves, not their own kinky moves, not what turns them on, but what a man's favorite is. Good sex will capture a man's love. The word capture is in there on a title of a magazine in 2023. Another message there is that men think about sex and women think about men thinking about them in a sexual way. You'll have to go back and look at the titles. I'll just say that again: men think about sex and women think about men thinking about them in a sexual way. That for all of this, that women need to have a particular type of body that needs to be constantly worked upon. So psychology is born out of oppressive assumptions and takes these assumptions far and wide until the population are seasoning their dialogues with judgmental terms. And no longer do people break up with a jerk, but they separate from a narcissist, and they're setting boundaries, and they're codependent, and they're being gaslighted, and so on. Again, there's nothing wrong with understanding these concepts and these terms, but one of my worries is that as therapists we can be a prejudiced psychotherapist at work and a judgmental popular psychologist in our social life, and rolling our eyes at red flags along with the rest of society without considering how sexist and homophobic the roots of some of these things are. We have a cultural obsession with relationship norms, and it's likely that it's not just our clients that are asking themselves about trying to seek certainty in relationships. It's probably the therapist as well. So I just have so much evidence around the history of women's mental health. So just popped a small slide in here about women's hysteria. Other signs of insanity are being the victim of domestic violence. One of the treatments for being a victim of domestic violence that was in the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, was lobotomy. So women are being abused by men, which makes them hysterical, so give them a lobotomy. Other signs of insanity were pregnancy, grief, or attraction to women, not having enough sex with their husbands, not smiling enough, being interested in politics, masturbating, overusing their limited female mental powers. This is recent. The lobotomy was 1930s. Okay, so this is really recent. Okay, so from self-help relationship books to the arrival of the TikTok armchair therapist, the popular psychology movement of the 60s, which tasked women with yet more responsibility, is now a hobby for us all. And as I said earlier, these rules, relationship rules, serve old dead white men and help make money for, you know, relationship gurus. So what makes a good relationship? This cartoon's by a guy called Edward Monkton. I love his cartoons. Are you normal? No. So just as a little bit of homework, after listening to me for nearly an hour, what makes a good relationship? Are you having enough sex? Do you have friends and activities outside your relationships? When did you last have a date night with your partner? How long have you been together? Have you always been monogamous? Might you be codependent? Are you sure you've spotted any red flags? The reason I've put that there is because I think that I really don't think that men sit down and go through this sort of lists. But I think that all of us should, men, women, and non-binary people, we should go through this to just become aware of our unconscious bias and assumptions. And here's some, you know, a second page of this. What do you think's okay or not okay? I've put down same-sex relationships, right over, just so that you can find things that you do have, you know, bias about. I've put at the end sexual attraction to children and sexual attraction to animals. Well, the attraction bit's debatable, but behavior, sexual behavior perhaps towards children, that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong, sexual behavior towards children. So I do have an assumption and a bias and a prejudice, and I'm not asking anybody to get rid of their bias. I'm asking you to be aware that you do somewhere draw the line. But you might, if you've got internalized homophobia and you're gay, and you might be drawing the line in a place that puts you at odds with self-acceptance and self-care and self-protection. So I've covered my purpose and my motivation today. And just to summarize, introjection of cultural norms does not support the exploration of authentic contact for women, for the disabled, for lesbians, in fact, for anyone. Cultural norms best serve old, dead white men. And engaging in the egotism of overthinking has never lent itself to improved relationship or improved contact. There's something particular about romantic sexual partnerships that means we abandon our core belief in just trusting the process or trusting our capacity to be okay with ourselves. So the freedom to be who we are and evolve our awareness of the other as distinct and different to us helps us begin to undo some of the discrimination within the inherited archaic and Freudian psychology. drew a little map for the journey of the later in life process. So we start off on the left hand top, go across, and then left hand bottom and go across, and we finish on the right. So we don't see lesbians, then we don't see ourselves, and then we're incongruent, which means we're at odds with ourselves. It's a dissonance of this introjected invisibility. And people say, how did you not know? But we've internalized that we're invisible. So it's then the shame and self-doubt and self-blame. How did you not know? How did you not know? Shame, self-doubt, self-blame, managing others' assumptions, trying to deal with other people's questions. There's self-criticism or lesbophobic criticism. There's something wrong with me because I'm deeply attached. You know, this is your own heterosexual bias and your own gender expectations in relationships. And then to come, you know, to really arrive in a more comfortable place as women, perhaps we can begin to say, I'm not the only one responsible for the relationship. Yes. That, you know, that is the conditioning of women, and it's reinforced if you've had a long experience of heterosexual relationships. So I saw a short bit of comedy by Rosie Wilby the other day, saying about how some woman came up to her at the end of a show for a book signing and said, oh, I'd love to be a lesbian, you know. Yeah, it's not as fun as it sounds. We've got a lot of work to do because of the bias and the prejudice and the society that we live in, and the internalized stuff. If you're gay, then it is wonderful to be in a relationship with the right person. It is, but we've got a long way to go in terms of marginalisation. My greatest teachers, of course, are my clients, my research participants, and you know, I've learned so much from my wife, from my girls, from my clinical supervisor. I'm so lucky to have the support I have. And thank you for supporting me and listening to me. And given that this is about a third of my paper, you can see how I had a lot of problems. I had to cut it down massively. I hope this helps you feel understood, as well as really think about how well you understand and support yourself